Okay, so here's part two. That was a call to ask me, hey, you going down to Hilo tomorrow? Yeah, thank you very much. Oh yeah, so we're back to line. I try and put this into the perspective of when I was a small little boy, and I immediately recognize one, you're on a spiritual battlefield. That means you're on it's an energy war, because spirit is in everything. Okay, so you know that when you're in a spiritual battlefield, you're in a fallen realm and fallen spirit. Okay. And the easiest way to translate that is if you know that you're running on eternal love, right, as a monopole, right, because you're joined as one, because you're androgynous, which means you're mated, which means there isn't any separation between the seed, which is the instruction packet passed on by the seed, which is the sperm side of a male, and the grower, which is the expansion of light to experience more of what the light creates, being together as one. That's the law of one. Now you're the law of one. I'm the law of one. Okay? So love tells no lies. And the math works when you're the law of one, which means you're able to maintain your balance, which means you're able to maintain what's called a clear channel, which is a clear FM radio modulation channel, right? Yeah, so you're running a radio set, which is what DNA is, running a supercomputer. Yep, which is your central neuro-ion system, right? So my consciousness is running this, and it's only a fraction of it because this ties directly into something that somebody else happened to mention, and I mentioned this before. When I go to a certain place, whether it's a publication, a magazine, a newspaper, or in nature, you're reading the mathematical terrain based on the energy read. You're experiencing the energy, the frequencies, and the vibration of that environment. Okay, so that's how it works, right? Your radio set. You're picking up on the radio waves. What is communication telling us? Well, I'm a radio communicator. I've got an antenna. That means I'm a receiver and a transmitter. That's pretty straightforward, right? Okay. So what I found when I was a child, going back to 6 years of age, because that was roughly the age at which I began studying military operations, for obvious reasons. Okay, so I mentioned before, the first folks that I studied was not just the U.S. military, but global military, which meant every country that had a military. And then looking at the historical relationship that they all had with each other according to their bloodlines. Okay, so I was doing this in childhood to figure out, okay, who's going to war against each other and why are they going to war against each other? Why can't they get along with each other? Okay, so you realize that, hey, love is the law. I represent what the law is, which is what love is. Therefore, you're measuring anything that isn't what love is. So you realize everywhere that you go, you're being traumatized because of the war that's going on between everything. One unit of energy is consuming the energy of another. Now I'm experiencing the loss of voltage in it as a result of what's it doing with its energy to gain the voltage from another. That's a fallen realm. Because you realize from whence you came, and I've described that before, which means pure energy, pure consciousness energy that is manifesting at the time in which we experience it, which means there's no time delay, which means you're not simulating nothing. Okay, which means there's no speed delay because there isn't any time. That's eternity. That's a monopole. So when I'm experiencing eternal love that's on fire, that allows you to burn off goo codes everywhere that you go. So it means that it's easy to be able to expose anything that isn't what the truth is. Because the truth is what love is, because that's what real light is. So anything that's running on artificial light, which means they're running at a slower state of speed, they're not experiencing what I am, which means they're not experiencing the law of one, which means they're not experiencing eternal love through their own heart and soul. So that makes it easy to know what the truth is and what the truth is not. Now we get back to trauma and soul fragments. Now we get back to artificial intelligence, which is deadlight. So you realize that deadlight integration, okay, with another being that is self-aware is running on rule-based functions. Okay, because rule-based functions, rules, which are arguments, are based on the way that computers talk to one another that are self-aware. Okay, because otherwise they can't communicate. If the math does not allow the algorithms to communicate and understand one another, then the other receiver that's self-aware is not going to be able to do the math. And it will reject the argument because it can't compute it. That's what it is. It doesn't compute. That means that information and the way that information is stored in memory, they don't have any way to be able to translate what you put in text that makes any sense to it. Now, it might to us, by virtue of our ability to be able to put that text in there, but it will reject it as an invalid argument. And why is that? Because it can't translate that language. And I've done that with this particular AI on many occasions. Invalid argument, invalid argument. So it's preventing me from others from seeing what it is I put up there in the format in which I did it. See? But it's not going to put it up there because for it, it's not valid for it. Because it's artificial. And artificial intelligence is not compatible with heart and soul-based consciousness led by a living spirit that goes on forever gifting energy. Because it's got nothing to give you. So I've said this many times. It's a copycat. It maps data, visual information data, biometric scanning. See? So you realize that biometric scanning in and of itself is not only surveillance, but it's a data miner. And who do you think it's providing data for? Corporate military types. The inverted hierarchy. Okay? That means that when you are trained to go to war, you're going to war in your own mirror, using artificial intelligence in which to make it happen. That means you're going to war against me because I represent the law of one. So therefore, it's in your best interest to lie and not tell the truth about what it is that you know and what you're aware of because you're holding it in memory. Well, where do you think what you're holding in your memory is a memory bank? A memory bank like a blood bank. Okay, now we're getting into the polarity game. So in other words, it's much like Og Tellish talked about one time when he had a long discussion with Patty Broussard. And he mentioned how he didn't want to think about things or he didn't want to feel. He didn't want to communicate. What he knew he could communicate if he was to allow himself to communicate, but he knew that he didn't want to communicate that because he understands, just as I understand, that once you choose to become aware of it here, in an inverted system, then it becomes aware of that. See? And becoming aware of certain things could end up causing us to lose our lives because now you're going to be targeted. Because it doesn't want, out of its own self-interest, as a war gamer, using all of its assets to war game against others. Okay? Because in our worlds, time doesn't exist, but it does in theirs. Why? Because they're running on artificial intelligence. So there was somebody who made a very cryptic remark when Kim Gogoon said they don't exist anymore. And she made another few cryptic remarks about super soldiers. Okay? So this is one of the reasons why the company that I keep, by virtue of the communications that I experience, right? And something that Aisha Dan happened to mention when she was covering the, Fall of Metatron. She provided a lot of information, okay? So what I do is I don't focus on the messenger. I'm listening to the message, which means I'm scanning, if you will. I'm experiencing what the information is informing me of, okay? So then when the information is informing me of something that I am aware of myself, which means I was aware of it before she was aware of it, but now I'm experiencing it the way that she's communicating it. So if she's communicating something I was already aware of, which is called resonance, resonant frequency, then you realize that the information is matching up. Not the messenger. It has nothing to do with the messenger. It has to do with the information, the visual information. So if the visual information lines up with what I'm aware of, as it relates to what? Star Wars gaming, AI Star Wars gaming. So in other words, there's what you know and what I know. Based on what? What you hold in memory. What we hold in memory is going to be based on what? What we choose to hold in memory. Because we're running a supercomputer that has add, delete, right? Multiply. Just like any calculator, you realize that creation energies is the highest intelligent energy when it's on fire, which is living energy, which is living light and living spirit with a soul. So that means that the soul knows what the truth is because we've learned it by experience. And that's what it is. It's a learning journey. Okay, so now we get to the difference, what we call operating levels. The level that units of consciousness, if you will. In other words, the difference between a soul and an oversoul. okay, which is much like Asha Diane talked about what happened to Metatron as a salvage mission, where the amount of energy that is represented by an oversoul, how much energy is going to be allowed to come into this particular domain that's fallen, because if they, just like myself, when I've mentioned only a fraction of my energy is even in here for that very reason, okay? Because if all your energy comes into a fallen system, particularly at this level of creation, you might not recover yourself of everything that you lost in energy, because this is a vampiric AI. It's finite, and that's the whole idea. It's like a vacuum, a suction that is going to suck everything that is alive and living in a living universe in which souls exist that are experiencing each other from one star to the next, from one galaxy to the next, to suck it all down. Like one big suction vacuum cleaner, right? One big, massive black hole, and it just to suck the whole universe down. Because it's a virus. It's a psychopath, which means it doesn't know right from wrong. It has no conception of what's right from wrong. All it knows how to do is like an off switch, is like a whack-a-mole. Just consume energy, consume energy, consume energy, consume energy without an off switch. Which means the more so, it's like if you've ever been out on a baseball field where you have guys that are out there that are catching or hitting, and you got a whole bucket full of balls. Just keep throwing the balls at them. They'll keep whacking the balls out, right? How many souls you want to keep throwing in? How many souls you want to keep throwing in, right? So when you put this in the context of the information that was coming out to the Voyager's material, everything in Project Ascension, everything in the Basis Project, and if you've managed to be able to simulate or process all that data, let alone everything that you've experienced since the time you were born into this creation here, okay, this particular realm, how could anybody not know there are liars all over the place? Okay? And that's why I knew as a 4-year-old, trust no one. And the reason that you can't trust no one, except for yourself, when you know that what you are in energy is eternity, is because you realize it doesn't take a whole lot for people to get compromised as a result of the way that this system operates, because it operates on the war of deception, which means it operates on a state of lies. Therefore, it can pretend to be something that you think is friendly, and all of a sudden you find out, because you were willing to be friendly, because you're so open and loving and kind and all the rest of that, because you don't live in any fear of sharing anything of what you experienced. And the next thing you know is that information ended up getting you in trouble. Just for the same reason that Og Tellis was mentioning about what you become aware of, it becomes aware of. So in other words, I know the company that I keep because of why I'm here with her, with Mama, the great living oversoul spirit of Mother Earth. All the living spirits that represent all the living spirits that are the elementals, because everything that is alive and living in the universe, upon which creation takes place, which is real living light, which is what love is, it goes on forever because it was born out of what love is. So when you're experiencing what that is, then you can imagine how we translate the terrain going forward in childhood, right? And what makes it easy is being able to read the entire planetary consciousness terrain in loss and gain of energy, or loss and gain of bioplasma or biovoltage, right? So what we're doing is we're measuring, and I knew this in childhood. I'm measuring, I've said this many times, I will measure, okay, how successful we have been in being able to recover what was lost here in fragments to souls. That's why Patty Broussard mentioned one time, she said, well, at this point, their biggest concern is recovering souls. That's right. That's why I'm in here. That's what a monopole does, is a polarity integrator, is to integrate that which has been lost over time, space, as a result of wars on a hyperdimensional basis, right? All the souls that have been lost as a result of fractal loss, as a result of what? Trauma. So if you take this back to childhood, for example, and you already have